Ooh.
So fast. I'm like, wow, here we are.
I was like fixing my hair, getting the collar ready, and then all of a sudden, boom, we're live.
So yesterday, guys, we were talking about how IOCDF is starting to do these clips and they like zoom in like so tight on our faces. And so we were like, oh, we're gonna like get extra ready. I did not get extra ready. Here I am, hair in a ponytail, let's go. Like
I know, we were joking. We need like hair and makeup.
such zoomed in, like, oh my goodness, it's my face. Okay. Hi you guys. So good to see everyone. Please say hi. I'm actually like so excited, Chris. Not that I don't love our guests. Of course I love our guests, but I'm like just so happy to be back with you because I feel like we've had such amazing guests with such good content, but I also have so many thoughts and questions. So you guys, I text Chris all the time and I'll be like, I need to talk. And Chris is like, I don't know. He's like working till 10 p.m. every night because he's some sort of like weird superhero. And yesterday he's like, okay, I'll call you at like 8 my time. I'm like, I'll be dead asleep at 10 p.m. Like I have 2 kids. I can't stay up late. I didn't stay up late before kids, so let's not give myself that. Anyway, we're going to talk live. So like today is going to be a day because I have so many thoughts from our recent webinars and live streams, but I also like the real reason I was calling Chris is I'm just really upset about a couple of things that I've heard lately about ERP, and like we're just going to talk about it live and be real and do this today so that we can have a conversation and then share our thoughts with you guys, because that is the point of these live streams. The goal here is that you guys get content, you get education, but you also just get to hear us talking about what's working, what isn't working in the field, questions we have, things we don't understand, frustrations that we share that we wish that people knew or had different or better education on. So we're so excited for y'all to be here. Please tell us hi, where you're joining from. Hey, Amy. Hi, Matt. Hi, Nikki. So good to see you guys. Love that y'all joined from all over. And we really, really, really want to make sure we get to questions today. We know we've had a lot of live guests on with a ton of content that's been amazing, but a lot of you have questions you want us to answer. We are here for it. Our goal is to answer those. So please ask away, put any questions that you have. It's the right way on the right-hand pane, to the right in that comment box. All right. So Chris, you wanna kind of start with a little disclaimer?
Yeah. As always, hold on, let me get my bookmark ready. I have the pre-submitted questions up, but I didn't have that up, but it takes me half a second. So as always, first of all, I just want to thank everyone for being here. Liz and I put a lot of work into this, as well as the IOCF puts a lot of work into it. And we just really, really appreciate everybody being here. And this is your live today. This is Ask the Expert. So please, please, please ask us any questions, anything from the recent lives or just any questions you have. But also remember that this live stream is educational and not intended to replace therapy. So for those treatment-related questions, specific, we can answer a lot of questions, but anything specific, please work with your provider or contact a local clinician. You can use the IOCDF's online research directory at iocdf.org/find-help to locate a trained clinician near you. Also, remember the IOCDF is not a crisis hotline. So if you're in a crisis or you are feeling suicidal or unsafe, please go to your local emergency room or call 911 or the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline by dialing 988, or go to 988lifeline.org. We want to create a safe space and be kind and respectful to everyone. So at the end of the day, we're here to support one another. A note, this is broadcast on several social media platforms and being recorded. And then before we jump into the live, don't forget that the IOCDF's online OCD conference that anyone can join from anywhere is happening Saturday, October 21st and Sunday, October 22nd. And you can head over to iocdf.org right now and sign up early and make sure that you get a slot. So please, please, please come join us at the conference. But it's good to see everybody here today, and feel free to ask questions and let us know where you're from.
Yeah, we are so excited. I see so many people saying hi, and I just love seeing that we have people joining from Canada, from Ireland, from all over the US. And it's just, Chris and I love it. We're just honored to have this space and to be here and to talk. And so let's just hop in. And then of course, if y'all have questions, please put them in line and we'll be sure we get to them today. But Chris, I have been feeling super frustrated and triggered lately about things I've been hearing in the ERP world. And I just want to pick your brain, but talk about it. So in particular, I've been hearing multiple situations where patients are getting, in my opinion, really bad ERP, and they're being asked to do things that I would never do with a patient. And so in turn, they're coming back and saying like, or people are saying to them, even other clinicians, that like you need ICBT because ERP like isn't working for you, or you're not willing to do ERP. And I'm in the background being like, but wait a second, like you haven't done good ERP. Like you got exposed, that's not real ERP. That's not what ERP should be. And first of all, I'm just so upset that there's clinicians in the field that are still doing ERP in this archaic way. And I think I'm just feeling so confused of like, why does that still exist and why is that still happening? But then also like, how do we really make sure that you guys as listeners understand if you're getting effective, good ERP, what should that look like? And so the only way I can think of it is that we spend time today talking about what it shouldn't look like, and a little bit of what it should look like. But I want to give an example. So I've heard a couple, quite a few different, right, exposures lately around like all sorts of stuff. But one in particular that I've heard multiple times is around like bodily fluids or having patients, you know, like for example, I know I know of a situation where a provider used to have patients like do squirt gun fights with urine, or like get semen on their hands and spread it throughout, like on themselves or throughout their house, or, you know, different places. Or and I just like, a lot of times when I hear these situations, I hear patients talking about how much that triggered them, and then how they were like, well, I don't want to do ERP if that's what it is, right? And we've heard this along the lines of other stuff that's similar, right? Like, I don't want to intentionally sin, you know, or a provider saying like, oh, you have scrupulosity, you should like say some blasphemous things. And it's like, well, that goes against my faith. Like, that's not something I would want to do. That doesn't seem values-based. Oh, well, that's what you need to do. And so then I hear people saying, well, then I can't do ERP. Like, I don't want to do ERP. And I'm, as a clinician, sitting there being like, but wait, that's not what ERP should be. And so we're in this tough spot of like, I feel like I'm trying to convince someone to do ERP, but trying to help them understand that like, but I wouldn't actually make you do those things. I wouldn't make you commit a sin, something that you feel like is a sin and you're not willing to do. I'm not going to ask you to do that for treatment. Something that you feel like is truly gross, or something that you wouldn't do if you didn't have OCD, I'm not going to ask you to do that for treatment. And so I just wanted to talk to you for a second in just like a candid, open way of like, how do we help get the message out to not just individuals, but to clinicians as well, that like, this is not what OCD treatment should be. And this bad reputation that ERP is getting lately is from clinicians who are doing things that are asking patients or pushing patients to do things that really are not in line with values-based ERP.
Yeah, you know what, one of the frustrations I have is because I think about, you know, obviously ERP saved my life. And then I think when I do ERP with clients, right, I do a lot of public stuff. I like to get the clients out in situations that are probably more likely going to come up with them than at home. And you know, there's 3 like big malls right surrounding where my office is, and I'm out doing exposures in front of the public. So if exposures were done in a sort of unsafe, harmful way, I would have like 80 witnesses watching my client and I doing those things, but it's not. You know, it's like I had a client who really enjoyed sushi. His family enjoyed sushi. He read an article that sushi might have mercury. He doesn't want to get mercury poisoning, so he gave up sushi. So he was ready. He's like, I want to get back into eating sushi. Like, my girlfriend likes sushi, my family likes sushi, and so we went and ate sushi together. Like, that's an exposure. We didn't have to. I mean, I don't know what that would be like overbearing, but it's not like we bought something with mercury in it and like chomped on it or something. Like,
would you go to a store and buy raw fish and tell someone to eat it that's not sushi?
No.
Just because you need them to do an exposure? Like, no, you wouldn't take that fear and say, okay, let's figure out what we can do that's the worst case scenario. That's something I probably wouldn't do, but force you to do it because that's what makes sense as ERP. Like, that doesn't make sense. That's illogical, actually, right? Like, ERP, the point of ERP is we get you back to that life you want, that life that OCD is taking you away from. One of John Grayson's things I love so much that he talks about is, what has OCD taken away from you? And the reason John talks about this and emphasizes this in the psychoeducation phase is he wants you to be able to identify the life that you want if you didn't have OCD, the life that you would be living if you didn't have OCD. ERP, you guys, should always, not most of the time, not some of the time, it should always get you closer to that life you want to be living. And if you feel like ERP that you're being asked to do, or that you're being told to do and you're doing it because you feel like you're supposed to, is it getting you closer to your values and maybe is taking you further away from them? Or if you feel like the ERP you're being asked to do doesn't make sense and isn't something you're comfortable with, I want you to not do that. And I want you to stop and have that conversation with your provider. I want you to be able to say, like, Chris, like, I hear where you feel like that would be the extreme exposure, that if I did that, it would show that I don't have this fear anymore. But like, I'm not comfortable doing that. And like, that's not something that aligns with my values. Like if I didn't have OCD, I wouldn't be having a water gun fight with urine. Or like, if I didn't, right? Like, I don't think that that really makes sense. So I don't know. I want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, if I could jump in with two thoughts. The first one is I know sometimes clinicians that don't utilize ERP as much anymore. One of the critiques that they've had with things that I've personally said is they'll say like, oh, you're always claiming that ERP didn't work because it wasn't done properly. How do you know ERP just didn't work for that person? And I don't know if you feel this way because you're at a higher level of care as well, but we have an intensive outpatient where I work. And so we get a lot of referrals for people that have been doing ERP but not finding a lot of success. And so when they come in and we're starting to work together, one of the first things I usually have to do is sort of like reteach someone ERP, because it does sound like they've gotten care for someone that might have done like a BTTI or ERP training, but maybe they don't specialize in OCD, or they see like 20% of their clients is ERP. And so they do it the more kind of just traditional behavioral way with no creativity, no values based, no cognitive component. And they're just sort of like, oh, you don't like doorknobs? We're going to go out and lick doorknobs. And it's like, that's not going to get somebody better. And so a lot of the treatment I do in the beginning with clients at a higher level of care is reteach them ERP, because I see it done a lot I always use that word, an archaic way, a way that a lot of us were taught many years ago. You know, you simply just kind of like make a hierarchy, you touch things, you do gross things, and then you get better. And that's not what it looks like anymore. The second thing I was going to say is ERP, for all those that are not clinicians watching, is your ERP should be collaborative. So you and your clinician should be sitting down, brainstorming together, a collaborative process of like, how am I going to get my life back? Evie Gould, who is on OCD SoCal's board, we did a in-person event, and she's very heavily into ACT, works with Lisa Coyne. And I remember somebody was saying like they didn't like ERP because it felt very just like hard and harsh. And as Evie was answering the question, I just loved how Evie said it. Evie was like, this is supposed to be a collaborative experience, a life-changing experience, an uplifting experience, a chance to really go after the things that has been taken away from you for OCD. And it should be something that brings you like excitement, pleasure, and gets you your life back. Now, we're not going to say getting better from anything isn't tough. I mean, any challenge that we take on in life is tough, but at the same time, you should be seeing results, you should be seeing recovery, and you should be feeling like you're on the path to get your life back, or the life that you've always envisioned.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the key, right? Is that it doesn't mean it's going to be easy, right? Because I want us to remember, if we had OCD and things were easy, we wouldn't have OCD, right? So like the thing is that the reason we are triggered, the reason these things stick, is because it's hard, because it's anxiety provoking. So we know that the work is going to be difficult. Any therapy you do should be difficult, right? If therapy is just easy and fun, we're probably not doing the real work, right? So I want to be clear about that. But it should be difficult, but extremely rewarding. It should be difficult, but getting you closer to your values, back to that life you want to be living, not difficult just to be difficult, you know? And I think that's the big difference is, if you're doing ERP that's tough, but it's values-based, it makes sense, right, for you, and you understand it, and logically you get it, and you're all in, and like you're committed and you're bought in, versus if you're doing ERP that like you don't understand or that isn't values-based, it feels like you're just doing ERP to do ERP, right? So I want you to think about that. I want you to really sit back and say, am I doing ERP to get back to my life or to get to a life, or am I doing ERP to do ERP? And if it's the latter and you're like, oh, I'm just doing this because my clinician's telling me, or I'm just doing it to do it, but it really doesn't make sense, or I don't want to be doing it, I want you to be talking about that. I want you to be thinking about that.
Yeah, I look at it as like a recent, or not a recent, actually, it was a client years ago, but, you know, we were talking about this, and they had come from a different treatment program. And one of their things, they had kind of traditional contamination, and they wanted to wash their hands or sanitize their hands before eating everything. And the big problem came because she was a little younger, would be like out on the playground, kids would hand her candy or food, and she was always running in the bathroom, washing her hands and stuff. And so from the prior treatment program, they were having her like go in the dirt and like rub her hands in dirt and then eat food. And when we were working together, you know, she was really hesitant to do treatment. She had already done it at this other treatment program, was really nervous. And I said to her, like, there is no time in my life, and I was much older than her, that I've ever rubbed my hands in dirt and ate food. That's just not something I've done. So I was like, why don't we do this? You know, there's a mall by, what do you like? And she likes chocolate. There's 2C's candy in the mall. And I said, why don't we just walk around the mall like normal? You can look at clothes, do fun things, and then we'll swing over to C's and you can get the sample chocolate and eat it with your hands without washing first. How about that? And she felt like that was easier. And so we did it, and she ate the chocolate. And she still got better. I mean, now she's at a point, she doesn't have sanitizer, you know, on her at all times. She's not running to wash her hands. I know her mom and bump into her mom sometimes, so she gives me updates. But the point is, she was able to overcome that fear of needing to wash her hands because she was afraid of germs and then getting sick. And she had a little emetophobia as well. But we didn't have to sit there and roll around in the dirt and roll around in the mud. So what I try to do as a clinician, and this is not just Liz and I, a lot of the clinicians I speak to do treatment the same way, is what is a realistic world situation that this client has been avoiding that they want to get back. They have pedophilia OCD. The treatment I always do is like, how is it preventing your life? Well, I have a nephew I haven't seen in 4 years. All right, let's work up to getting you back to spend a weekend with your nephew. Can you bring the nephew to the office? We can hang out with the nephew and color and play. And a lot of times clients who have gotten previous treatment will say to me, like, this isn't field treatment. Like, I'm not like crying. I'm not disgusted. I'm not throwing up. And I'm like, exactly though. Like, why do you have to look at pictures of kids in bathing suits for hours when we can just go to the source and play with your nephew and get that life back? So I think that that's the big difference with a more modern touch of ERP is how I think of it.
Yeah, like and again, when we talk about values-based ERP, what we're saying is like, do you see the value in the ERP, and does the ERP bring you closer to your values? Like, I want you to be asking both those things. Clinicians that are listening, I want you to think about, when you pose the question, hey, I have a patient with blank, blank, blank fear, what ERP should I do? Why are you asking that question to clinicians? We don't know what ERP you should do. Your client is who knows what ERP they should do. Your clients should be guiding the therapy process for themselves. They should be telling you what they want to do, what's important to them, the life they want to get back to. I shouldn't be telling you that because I have no idea, right? I could give you examples of what I think makes sense, and your patient could be like, that doesn't hit the mark at all for me, right? Like, that doesn't bring, and it's like, okay, well then what does? And so again, the question is not for me to answer, Chris to answer, the board, right? The IOCDF to answer. It's a question for the patient to answer. Patients and family members who are listening, it is for you to answer. You should be able to say, yeah, I see the value in that. I know I need to do that. Man, my OCD is stopping me from being able to play on the ground with my children. So I got to sit on the ground, and I got to work up to sitting on their playroom ground together, right? Whatever it is, versus me just saying, oh, you're afraid of floors. Let's go sit on this random bathroom together and just sit there, and that's all. And then your exposures are done. But you don't ever relate it or generalize it back to playing on the ground with your kids, when that was really why it was important for you to not be afraid of the ground anymore, or the floor. So I want us to be super thoughtful about that. What are the goals, right? That is the beauty of telehealth. The beauty of telehealth is that we can do exposures now with you in your house. You know, a lot of us in the past didn't have capacity to do home visits and to go, right? And so now we can do that with you. And ERP should do that. It should bring you closer to your values. It should allow you to practice being able to do things that are important to you, that are values-based to you, that you know you need to be doing and you want to be doing to be able to live that life you want. The best advice I ever got from a patient when I would run our Greater Good group was I would have them say statements. And one of my patients' statement was, I no longer want to live a half life because of my OCD. And I just loved it. And so many of us thought it resonated so well, because it was like, yes, like this thought process that I can't live the life the way I want, or I can't live the life I want to live because of my OCD. That's what we're fighting against. We're not fighting against random things that we think make sense that we should go target with ERP. Like, why would you want to do that? That sounds awful, right? Like, Chris, let's just go do scary things without like a real reason. No, I want you to do scary things and have them be purposeful. If a patient has a fear of flying, but they live in Texas, their family's in Texas, and they have no reason to leave Texas, it's going to be pretty hard for me to want to get them to see the importance of conquering that fear. But if their daughter and grandchild moves across the country, and now all of a sudden being able to conquer that fear means spending time with their grandkid that's really important to them, they're going to be way more willing to do those scary exposures to get them closer to what's important, right? And again, the exposures shouldn't be we sit and watch plane crashes. That's not ERP. I want to be clear about that, because that's how some providers think that's what that would be. Oh, you have a fear of flying? Oh, let's read about flying. Let's read about crashes. Let's just get you okay with being, the chance that you could get in a plane crash. Like, what? None of us would get on a flight if we thought that every flight meant there was a truth that risk was real or probable, right? We get on a flight because we know the probability is very low, and we don't want to let anxiety and fear dictate our life. And I just want to be so clear about this, you guys, because it is heartbreaking to me when I hear story after story after story after story of people who are like, ERP doesn't work for me, or I don't want to do ERP, or I'm not willing to. And it's like, well, why? Oh, because this is what my provider made me do, and I don't want to do that sort of thing. And I have to be like, well, yeah, of course you don't want to do that. I wouldn't want you doing that. And that's not what ERP has to look like, but that can be so confusing. And so we've done a couple webinars lately on rebranding ERP. We've really tried to talk about that ERP should be values-based. ERP should feel right. It should feel logical, not OCD logical, but it should feel logical. You should be able to say, I understand why I need to do this, even though my OCD doesn't want to. I get it, right? And I'm willing to do it. And it should bring you closer to that life you want to be living. It also should give you clarity. And that's a piece a lot of people don't talk about that Chris and I have been talking a lot about lately. ERP should give you clarity. If you have OCD, pedophilia, OCD, fear of being a pedophile, ERP should not include doing things that I wouldn't do. It should not include doing things that Chris or others wouldn't do, doing things that feel gross, that feel scary, that feel disgusting, that feel non-values based around, these sexual intrusive thoughts. That's not what ERP should be. I lived with pedophilia OCD for many years. ERP for me was spending time with my niece, changing her diaper when I babysat her, working up to, maybe giving her a bath, or being willing to hold her on my lap and give her a hug. These things that were super valuable that OCD stopped me from being able to do. Not going and sitting at a school park and just staring at kids all day, which felt uncomfortable and weird and something I wouldn't want to do. And thinking that you might be a pedophile. Oh, maybe you are a pedophile, and writing pedophile over and over on a sheet of paper while I'm looking at kids. Like that, I don't need to do that to get at my fear. I can do values-based activities and have the same, if not actually better, results. But the biggest piece is that after I do that ERP, I have clarity that I'm not a pedophile. And this is actually kind of, Chris, I don't know if you've noticed this, but I found that some patients get triggered by this. They're like, wait, I thought I couldn't ever have certainty, and I have to be okay never having certainty. And I'm like, well, wait a second. Certainty is a loose term. Like, it's hard for us, right? Certainty is 100% certainty, which isn't really possible for a lot of things in life. You should have clarity. After doing ERP, you do get clarity that I'm not a pedophile, that I love my niece and nephew, that I'm not going to harm them, that I'm not a danger to them. I know that was certainty because I did ERP. Before I did ERP, I did not know that was certainty, and I believed the lies that OCD was telling me.
Yeah, no, agreed. I mean, even in my own care, I had harm thoughts around family members. I had sexual intrusive thoughts around family members and strangers. And people will ask me all the time, they'll say, Chris, do you still suffer from OCD? And I always say, no, my OCD is in recovery and managed. And the things that align with me as a person are things I have to keep in check. So perfectionism is a big example, but things around harming others or sexual intrusive thoughts, those have never been aligned with me as a person. That's not the kind of person I am. Those are not my values. So those thoughts don't come up anymore. I don't experience those thoughts after having those thoughts to the point that I could barely leave my house or be around people. So the point is through ERP, I was able to trust myself and gain insight and get clarity to recognize I'm not that thing I was. And everybody comes into my office, they always say what can I expect from treatment? And what I always tell them is we're going to drain the OCD out of your life, out of the situation. And the clarity that you want will come. You'll start to get it slowly as you do the treatment. You'll get it quicker as you get into the treatment. And then eventually when treatment's done, you'll have clarity. There's going to be certain things you can't have perfect clarity, right? Like everybody, if somebody, I think of Scrupulosity is a good example. You can definitely get clarity around what is your value, what is your faith, what kind of way do you want to practice your faith, what connection do you want to have with your church. That's been taken away from you from OCD. Can we ever get clarity if you're going to heaven or not? No, but that's not the goal of treatment, is to know everything. The goal of treatment is to say, like, I want to practice my faith in a way that is valuable to me, the way that I see it, the way that adds like life to myself, the way that I'm in the image of my God. That's what I'm here to get treatment for. So the goal of treatment is not to burn Bibles and rip Bibles and all that stuff, because that's not going to make somebody feel closer to their faith. An example is if a client can't go to their church and has missed church for 6 months, even though they love church, because they're having a fear of having an intrusive thought, something that is blasphemous in the church. And they're like, okay, I already don't like these thoughts, but I'd rather have them at home than at church. The goal would be to get them back into church. That's the whole reason they came to treatment. Nobody came to treatment to say, how can I have all of these kind of like crazy activities that sound like a reality show? I think a big part of the reason why ERP has grown and evolved over time is two big things I think of. Is I think one, for me at least, learning about inhibitory learning, this idea that when we do exposures, we learn. And the goal of treatment used to be to habituate. So the reason I think a lot of therapists had clients do some of the things that we're talking about is they wanted to get their client's anxiety up so the client could ride the wave of anxiety and it go down. Now, habituation is still helpful in the ERP model, but it's not the only goal. With inhibitory learning, and John Abramowitz is the leader in that. You can see him second Wednesday of the month at this time slot for a research roundtable. But when I learned that clients are learning from the exposures, I'm like, that's what I want to make my exposures definitely focus more on, is the learning. So with that client with the C's candy, we talked about it. Did you end up getting sick? Did you get through it? How would you have managed if you did get sick? Like, we talked about that in a goal to build up her confidence. The second thing is acceptance and commitment therapy. I think of like Mike Tuig and Lisa Coyne and all these great people. I had mentioned Evie Gould earlier, who have really spearheaded that for OCD. So really having clients accept the presence of thoughts versus trying to get rid of them or identify with them, committing to making goals and to make things in your life happen despite having OCD. And so I've seen ERP become softer. I've seen it become more education based, and then all these different things. I will say, the first question I saw was about ICBT. I understand why people want a more cognitive therapy. I've always felt that way. My therapist did a good job with the cognitive component. And I think for a while there in ERP, cognitive was a bad word. One of the people that I learned a lot from is Barbara Vanapin from USC, and she has a very heavy CBT component in her treatment. And I noticed, I was like, oh, it seems like clients are more willing to do the exposures when she doesn't do ICBT. She does, I guess, traditional CBT, you'd call it. But a lot of her clients would come to my support group and they would explain how through CBT, they would become more likely to do ERP. I feel like that with my treatment, my therapist had a great cognitive component, and I always understood why I was doing an exposure and what the purpose was. And then when I hear clients come in who really hated ERP, they're telling me the second, third session, they're doing exposures, and they're doing high level exposures, and the therapist never even had a conversation about why they did it, how come it's not harmful, et cetera. So once again, I think throwing away ERP is the biggest mistake. We know it has helped so many people, and it is definitely our frontline treatment. And what I would encourage, if you're watching this and the things that Liz and I are saying, doesn't sound like the treatment you're getting, that's when you might want to find a more seasoned clinician who's been up on the latest treatments, who are constantly going to trainings and reading new books and trying to be better themselves.
I want to stop for rewind with Barbara's CBT stuff. And I just want to say for a quick second, if you're doing ERP, if you're looking for an ERP provider, you're already doing ERP, your provider should be spending so much time in that education phase. So much time you shouldn't be doing ERP until you know why you're doing ERP. You want to do ERP. You're ready to be doing ERP. Not, we're just gonna, like session 1, I think, back up 4 more steps. I feel like a lot of times, I'm gonna back up even more. I keep saying it. So there's theories of interventions in psychology world, right? And cognitive behavioral therapy is the umbrella or the theory that ERP is within, right? The cognitive therapy and behavioral therapy, and then there's CBT. So it's this CBT as a whole is known to be a treatment model that's very goal oriented, it's here and now, it's future focused, and that it's an active treatment model, right? So often with CBT, you're going to be getting homework, you're going to be doing active work together, behavioral interventions together, and you should see outcomes pretty quick, right? Most of our research shows us that in the OCD world, people should see really good differences in as little as 12 to 16 sessions, 3 to 4 months. The downside with those stats, you guys, is that I feel like both providers and patients feel like that means we have to hurry up and do ERP session 1. Like, oh, that means that like if we're just talking and we're doing education, then this is a talk therapist and this isn't an ERP provider. Because a lot of people will say like, you should be doing behavioral stuff. You shouldn't be doing behavioral stuff until you're ready to do behavioral stuff. And so you actually should be spending the first sessions talking about OCD, talking about anxiety, engaging in psychoeducation, right? Sometimes it feels like, is this reassurance? Like, I don't worry about if I'm giving a patient reassurance in the early stages of our treatment, because I'm actually just educating them. I'm making sure they know the difference between OCD, not OCD, anxiety, not anxiety, what's happening in your brain, why you're responding the way you're responding, how we can actually change that, how we can change your whole relationship with anxiety and OCD. I'm giving examples of what that might look like, what you should expect, and I'm making sure that I leave so much time to answer questions, to have active discussion way before we do any ERP. And I want to be really thoughtful about that, because I understand for providers listening that there's this urgency of like, well, I have to be doing active behavioral therapy, I have to be doing active ERP. Slow down. It is okay to slow down. Actually, it's critical to slow down. For your patients, it is critical. Patients, slow down. I have to tell so many of our residents here, right? We have to have conversations with them when they first get here. It's like, well, I need a BP. I need to be working. I need exposures. And we're like, they're all going to come. You're going to get all that. But we want you to slow down. I want you to understand the why, the how, the process. And I want you to be totally willing before I ask or force you or encourage you to do things that don't make sense or that you're not there, right? That's not what active ERP looks like. So again, ERP is not, you show up in session day 1, you meet Chris and he's doing exposures with you that day. It's like, no, he's getting to know you. He's building rapport with you. He's understanding your OCD. He's building, right, a treatment map together. And then you slowly start to do some exposures. But I want to make sure we're really thoughtful about that education is a critical component of ERP treatment. And if people are not slowing down to engage in education, they are potentially moving you too quick and kind of doing ERP in a haphazard way.
An example of that, because you're right, I think once again, I look at the way that all of us were trained, and there was always this component of like doing any kind of cognitive work as reassurance. But I remember back, I was so severe that when I walked into my therapist's office, I legit forgot physics. I forgot how things worked. Like my brain would just make things up. I was talking about it with, when it comes to, when we did the live with Allegra, I was talking about the example of like driving by a billboard and seeing alcohol and assuming I was drunk like that. When your OCD has gotten to that far away from reality, it's so important that your therapist sits you down in the beginning and explains like how you arrived to that. How did you look at that and assume that a cardboard billboard way up there could cause you to drink? Like walk it through and talk it through, because sometimes, like myself, you just don't even know. And if my therapist would have said right out the gate, okay, then what we need to do is you need to go out and you need to drive around these 3 billboards and just keep driving, I would have thought at that moment, like, this is unsafe. Why would I put myself in an unsafe situation if I had no clue why? So an example is like when I have clients who have contamination, I call it like the blue paint theory. I have like these like 6 things I sit down and talk to all my clients day 1, 2, and 3, right, of treatment when it comes to contamination. And one example is what I call the blue paint theory. And clients will tell me that if they've touched something contaminated, they're going to spread it forever until they wash their hands. And so I always say, if I give you about this much blue paint and I said, I want you to paint my entire office with this much blue paint, what would you think? And they look at me and they're like, you're crazy. I could maybe do a little bit of the wall with that much blue paint, but there's no way I could take this much blue paint and spread it on your whole wall. And I'm like, well, then how come this much contamination that you touch? Maybe it's jelly from a peanut butter jelly. Maybe it's invisible germs. How come you can touch that much and spread it on your car and your house and your bed and your neighbor's house and the mall and the store, but you can't spread blue paint? And it starts to give them insight. Like, you're right. When I'm scared about something, all logic gets thrown out the window. But when it's something I'm not scared about, I get what you're saying. And so I have these like 6 or 7 things like that I really go into. And what I find is then when we do exposures, the client is more likely to do it because they're like, this is silly. I know I'm not going to spread this jelly or this pizza grease or whatever it is all over everything I own, because this much pizza grease can't land on my entire house that's like 1,000 square feet, right? So some clinicians might say that sounds like reassurance, but when I'm working with a client day one, they don't know different. The brain works differently around contamination, around scrupulosity, around POCD than the average brain. And if they don't understand what's going on, and they don't understand what they should be thinking and saying in their head while they're doing the exposure, they may touch something in front of you to make you happy and to people please, but they're going right back home and doing compulsions.
That's right. Yeah, I think the logic and the insight is such an important piece of psychoed, of helping patients see, right? I'll have patients that are literally like, well, you know, they didn't touch something, and then afterwards we just did an exposure. It's like, well, what if I guess I'm second guessing and I'm not sure, like maybe I did touch that thing. And it's like, but like, I literally watched you didn't touch it, right? But there's that fear and that anxiety that just really, really persists. All right, next question. Someone submitted a question I want to jump to at 11:03. SAS see things. How would you do ERP with someone who is scared of the unpardonable sin? I can take this or you can, Chris.
Why don't you start and then I could jump in after?
Yeah, so first of all, I just want to say that really, I think that if this is rooted in scrupulosity, I want us to remember that the goal of scrupulosity treatment is not to have you engage with your fear, but instead to allow you to get closer to your faith. So I'll use a different analogy, but somebody who has a fear of HIV and they have contamination fears, and they have fear of bloodborne illnesses, our goal is not to get them infected with HIV, right? Like, that's not a treatment goal. Like, everyone can say, like, of course you wouldn't do that. That wouldn't make sense. That'd be unsafe. You're not going to ask somebody to go put themselves in risky, dangerous situations and see if it happens. Like, that's not what we're going to do. So we're not going to ask you to do things that you would feel like could be an unpardonable sin, right? We're not going to ask you to go against your faith or to see if that can become true, or like, let's have you just go commit it so you'll feel okay. Like, no, we would not want you to do that. But instead, what we want to say is, okay, how far has this fear been taken that it is now starting to really impact your life? And how can we allow you to get back to living your life the way you want, but be able to not let the fear dictate and rule your life and decisions, right? So again, with scrupulosity, the goal is that we allow you to get closer to your faith, to have a healthier faith relationship, not that we take you further away from it by treatment.
Yeah, I always, what I like to do first, anytime a client comes in with a certain obsession, I always ask them, like, how did we get here? You know, like if a client is a father and he's afraid that he's going to harm himself and leave his sons without a father, I ask, like, how did you get to that point? Because I think for a lot of us, we don't recognize like how we even got to the place that we are. So that's one of the first things I always ask clients is like, how did we get here? So for this, the first thing I'd say is, how did you get to that point that you believe that you've done the unpardonable sin? And then second, how do you keep reinforcing that belief? And what I'm guessing, and I would focus a lot on response prevention once we've kind of worked through how they got there, is that on a daily basis, you're trying to figure it out. You're reading the Bible, you're trying to replay thoughts, you're trying to play it out. Did I not? All that. What's so difficult about having OCD is in real life, the more research, the more things you look up, the more studying that you do, the more information that you gather, the more information you get. In this situation, the more you try to figure out, the more you try to think something through, the more confused you're going to get. So the trying to figure out is the compulsion here. And the more that you do that, the more you're going to feel guilty, the more you're going to feel stressed, the more you're thinking about it, the more you're focused on it. And now OCD can pretty much tell you anything and you'll believe it. And so what I always say is, remember that OCD attacks the things you care about the most. All my clients that come in with this fear and other scrupulosity fears are some of the biggest people that are into their faith. They're some of the people that are most dedicated to their church and to their congregation and to their God. And that's why OCD is able to sneak that in. So I know so badly it's like you want this answer, right? But that's what's hard with scrupulosity and some of these other themes is like you're not going to get the answer that you want. And I have clients even going to priests and to pastors and things like that and still not getting the answer. And so the initial question is not really the problem here. It's trying to solve it. So once again, what we've been talking about is you don't accept uncertainty forever. You don't say, well, I did the unpardonable sin, I'll just have to live with that. I mean, somebody who's values their faith is going to say, well, I can't do that. What we're going to instead say is like, how are we contributing to the problem and how can we pull our energy back and how can we learn to have this thought but still not let us affect our connection with our faith? That's really what the treatment should be exploring.
Yeah, I think that there's this piece that people think ERP means we have to be okay with our worst case fear. Like, oh, I have to be okay with committing the unpardonable sin. Like, no, you do not. I have to be okay with being a pedophile. No, you do not. I have to be okay with harming, that I'm going to harm my family members. No, you do not. Right, Chris? We did this talk a while ago that like you do not have to accept your worst case fears as truth or accept being okay with them if they are truth. Like, of course not. They go against who we are. None of us would do ERP if it was like, yes, sign me up that I have to be okay for these horrible things like that I'm not okay with, that I have to like learn to tolerate them. And the biggest thing I want us to be thinking a lot about is how can we make sure that ERP is doing things in a way that we understand that ERP doesn't mean I have to accept these as truth. But what ERP can do is allow me to still have a great relationship with faith and with my life and actually be certain or have clarity that I'm not committing an unpardonable sin, that I'm not a pedophile, that I'm not going to harm my family members, right? ERP should get you there. And so as a provider, right, this is why you work with an OCD specialist, because they start understanding your case and everything that's going on. And then they together work with you to say, let's develop an ERP plan for you to help get you there.
Yeah.
Kaja at 1106 said, hi, can you please explain about inference-based cognitive behavioral therapy? Is it better than ERP? Some websites show ICBT can help to overcome OCD without anxiety and fear.
Well, going back to what I was saying originally is there is still a lot of people that treat OCD using ERP in a very, very, very behavioral model. And the problem that for a lot of people is, let's say somebody had taboo thoughts, their therapist was constantly like, well, you'll never know you're a pedophile. You'll never know this. You got to kind of just accept uncertainty. So I think for a lot of people, Allegra was, organic about it on our stream. That wasn't working for them. And so ICBT is a newer, treatment model that is more cognitive based. They used to call it inference based therapy. I think that name probably makes more sense because there's not really a B in ICBT that they do. It's much more cognitive, but there's this idea that, okay, if we can really help the client slow things down and understand like how they came to their original doubt, then they'll get clarity that their doubt was based on faulty inferences, and they'll sort of just no longer need to do compulsions. What I believe, and I think Matt Bannister made a comment about, and I've seen other advocates that have used ICBT pull from ICBT. What I personally believe, this is just my clinical insight, is I think there's a lot of really good treatments, and I think there's a lot of ways. It was a conversation that we had at the conference with John Hirschfield, who's going to be on the stream the last Saturday. I keep saying Saturday, the last Wednesday of this month, about the poetic blend of evidence-based therapies. I think that what I've seen people found helpful is there's certain aspects of ICBT that they blended into their treatment. Once again, if their ERP is strictly behavioral, a lot of people need a cognitive component. I've always said to clients, like, how did we get here? And I think sometimes in the past, I've heard other ERP therapists say that doesn't matter. We just need to focus on like, it's here. How do we deal with it? Right. So my personal opinion is if you do find some things very helpful with ICBT, I would say absolutely utilize some of those techniques that you find helpful. It's not as evidence. I don't want to say that. It's not as studied, I would say, as ERP. And I personally still believe that ERP is the frontline treatment, but we've also talked about how DBT is helpful, and that's what you said, Matt. We've also talked about how ICBT, how CBT, how ACT, how mindfulness, how metacognitive can be helpful. I think the biggest thing is sometimes people get so particular about the letters and all that stuff. I think what you're really trying to do in treatment is get insight on why you have these thoughts and experiences. How do you deal with them mentally? How do you stop mental compulsions? How do you change behaviors? How do you get back into life? I would say there always has to be an ERP component. That's just my personal opinion, because I can't imagine. I was thinking about this. I don't know how you feel, Liz. I have a couple clients that I call heady, like they're so in their head. And I'm thinking, like, if my treatment with them was only cognitive, that's all they do all day. They don't leave their house. They don't really do much. They just sit in their head and constantly think. And what's been most effective for them is like, get out of the house, go do some structure, like, let's go do things together, right? And so I've seen that be helpful. So my personal opinion is that ERP should absolutely be a part of your treatment. And if ERP is not a component, I would be concerned. That's my personal opinion. I'd also be concerned if somebody was saying only this treatment works, only ERP, only ICBT. You shouldn't blend anything. I think a lot of us are saying there's a lot of really helpful tools from different treatment modalities. And sometimes one of the components of a modality can be the thing that pushes someone to get better. So that would just be my opinion. But that's kind of what I think. I don't know what you think, Liz.
Yeah, I think that I think right now our research and evidence would point to ERP should be the first line and the first treatment that you try. And I do want to be kind of clear about that. That right now, that's what we know, right? Is that the research and studies would show us that should be the first line intervention. I think that it would be very rare for there to be a ERP provider who is doing only ERP. Right? Who isn't using ACT approaches or cognitive approaches or integrating different things, because at the end of the day, we should be treating you. We should not just say we're treating with ERP. It should be, I'm treating you, whatever you need. If Chris is my client and he shows up in my office, I'm treating Chris however he needs to be treated, right? Maybe I spend 6 sessions with Chris in psychoed before we jump to ERP because that's what he needs. And maybe Samantha comes and sees me and she only needs 1 session of psychoed because she's ready to go and knows what she's, and so again, we talked about this a couple weeks ago. It's treating the whole client, and it's saying like, what do you need and what's going to work best? And there's been times I've started with my traditional values-based ERP, and I'm like, oh, we need to add in some other stuff, or we need to shift some modalities, or wow, I'm seeing the willingness isn't there, so I need to slow down and we need to do some different stuff first. That's what a good clinician should be doing, right? None of us should have rigid approaches of like, we only do ICBT, we only do ERP, or like when people will say like, oh, well, we would never do this or we would never do that. Like, yes, you should never do stuff that's not ethical or like never, right? There's lines we should all have. But really, like, I should be willing to do whatever my client needs me to do to help them move forward, to help them break free, and to allow them to have the life they want. I think a lot of people imagine, and they're like, well, I could never do ERP with a patient because I could not imagine just having them sit down and write these scripts about, being a pedophile. And I sit there and I'm like, I haven't had a patient with pedophilia OCD sit down and write a script saying they might be a pedophile. I don't think ever, right? But certainly not in years and years now that treatment has shifted and we've learned and we've grown and we've evolved, because that's not what's needed, right? In the past, you guys, for literal OCD treatment with someone with a fear of racial slurs, people would have them write down racial slurs, like have them write. I would never do that in today's, I would never do that. I would never have a patient do that because I wouldn't write a racial slur, right? And that is something that maybe years ago it felt very behavioral. It makes sense. You're afraid of it. Let's do it. Where now it's like, actually, like, can I have you go have lunch with your friend of color and be with them and allow thoughts that you might say something bad to be there, but to still have meaningful, great conversations with them. And that's going to actually be harder than sitting writing racial slurs, but not encountering people where you could actually say something that could be triggering. And you're going to see that that's values based because your goal is like, I want to be with all my friends. I want to be with my family. I don't want to be feeling like I have to avoid people because I might say something inappropriate because of my OCD, and so I want us to be really thoughtful about how ERP should evolve. And I think the more as a client, the language, you can also call your therapist out on it. You can say things like, why would I need to do that? Or that doesn't make sense to me. And you should be asking those questions, right? That's why rapport building at the beginning of treatment is so important, is that we should create a safe space that you'd be willing to tell me, hey, that doesn't feel good, or that, right? Like, you should have that relationship with your provider.
Yeah, absolutely. An example, going back a little bit about like treatment, different modalities and stuff like that, I think of it as like when there's medication, right? When clients ask me, should I go on medication? I send them to a psychiatrist. And what I see is that medication would be the front line. And what that means is it's the most evidence-based, it's the most researched, it's the most studied, and it's the most shown to be most effective. There are going to be some people that medication doesn't take someone far enough, or it doesn't work for them. Or maybe it does work for them, but they have a lot of side effects. So then they have some other options. There's TMS as an example. Some people are starting to look at other things like ketamine. There's deep brain stimulation, et cetera. That's how I think that the treatment map should be for the therapy part of it. It would be like ERP is going to be that start. But once again, like as a provider, I am always willing to be flexible. If I'm sitting down with a client, like here's an example. I work with a lot of younger clients or a lot of teens. If I spend too much time in a session with them, their eyes glaze over. And I'm funny, okay? I'm not the like most confident in a lot of things about myself. But one of the feedback I get from all my clients is they're like, you're funny, you make it interesting, right? But I'm still going to have that kid's eyes glaze over in a 3-week, one-on-one, 3-hour-a-day IOP. And so the more we get out of the office, the happier they are, the more they're engaging. And their parents are like, look, he wouldn't leave the house all summer. This is the first time he's leaving the house. This is great. So that's where I always get worried when someone doesn't have a behavioral component. I'm like, your client's just sitting there hearing, like, talking back and forth, so I can be helpful, even if it's cognitive, even if it's insight based, right? Or like I said, a client that's just too much in their head. Now, some of my clients don't think. Everything is just automatic. They feel anxious and they just act. Those are the clients that I'm like, whoa, we got to slow things down. We got to look at like, how did this thought and this belief about yourself originate? What are some of your core fears? How do you get triggered? And then once you're triggered, what is that automatic thought? And then what do you do with it? Like really slowing things down. Are you using kind of like, cognitive distortions or confirmation bias to like prove that your fear is correct, right? So if somebody is, in a grocery store and hear a cough and immediately drop their groceries and run out, I'm not going to sit there and spend time walking in grocery stores and having, coughing around them or whatever, because that person is like already so in their fight or flight. So let's sit in the office. Let's slow things down. So as a clinician, we always have to sort of recognize like what it is that person needs. And Rich Gallagher, who I know I mentioned on previous lives, I really like a post that he put previously in a Facebook group we were part of. He's like, any model that you become too much about, it's really about the client and what they need, and what we should be doing as therapists is trying to fit that. But to be clear, I do think that ERP needs to be that first stop, and there needs to be that component. And I would be cautious if you work with a therapist that absolutely doesn't use ERP, or ask them, like, why don't you think ERP is effective? I'd love to hear it. And if they say, like, I really don't want to put you through torturous things, that's when you can say to them, hey, wait a second, like, I've been watching these live streams and I've been reading articles. It doesn't seem like ERP has to be torturous anymore. It actually looks like it can be values-based. It can be things I would normally do with my family, and it actually can be fun. That's what I think you should have a conversation about.
Totally. I love it. And just read through the comments, you guys. I love your comments. I love everything you guys are saying. So get angry at OCD for taking away what you valued. You can live your life again according to your values. I love the motto of freedom over functioning. It's empowering and understanding how value-based ERP truly starts your recovery to freedom from OCD one step at a time. Amy, I love this comment at 1126. I feel like that we could just like coin this as the title of today's talk. Values-based ERP can give you the freedom to know your voice from the voice of OCD. You can trust and believe in yourself. I love this. Yes, times 1 million. Integration of multiple interventions, ERP, ICBT, ACT, and DBT together can be great and can complement each other. It's been helpful for me, right? So it's what works for you. Like that's what we're asking. It's right. And you figure that out. All right, next question, 1133. Chantel said, I'm really struggling with finding a therapist that specializes in OCD and ERP. I've read so many reviews, but everything is overwhelming. I'm finding that OCD is not talked about as much in Canada. Is there any great online or telehealth therapist that you would recommend? This is such a great question, Chantel, and I know actually that Liz Lonely with IOCDF is working really hard to increase access to care and services in Canada, and I know that's a big mission of hers, so I'm hopeful IOCDF will have more on this and be able to provide more resources in the upcoming months, or however long it will take. With that being said, it is a little bit difficult because of state lines of like where people can practice and they can't. I do think NoCD might offer services in Canada, so that could be an option. The big thing is it's less about where do you go, and it's more about what is the training and background of the clinician you're working with. And so I want you to really say, okay, I want to work with an OCD clinician. When you're with that OCD clinician, I want you to be thinking, okay, what training and background do you have, right? And how does that match with what I'm looking for an OCD provider? Do they have training at a specialty OCD program? Have they been doing OCD work for a long time? Did they attend just a 3-day, seminar and that was their only background and I'm one of their first clients? Like, are they getting continued consultation? You can ask that. You should ask that when you're searching for a clinician. In addition, I think that I want us to be really clear that in-person therapy is kind of a great number one option if it's accessible, or telehealth, right? Of course, there's different levels of care. So programs like ours, which is residential and a day program, we take patients from all over the world. So patients from Canada come here. But there are amazing self-help books, self-help resources, self-help websites that to me can also be a great tool for you and a clinician. So if you're working with a clinician who doesn't understand OCD at the level you'd love for them to, but you can use this self-help tool as a guide for your therapy with them, that can also be a great resource. But of course, online trainings, going to IOCDF, right, and looking up what providers in Canada. I believe Monica Williams has a full clinic in Canada. So I would definitely look into that one and see what resources, because Monica is a leader in the OCD world who's in Canada.
I was just going to add, one thing that you can do is if you email the IOCDF info@iocdf.org, people will ask them sometimes, hey, is there someone you suggest? I know like at OCD SoCal, we get emails all the time and they'll say like, I want an in-person therapist in Redondo Beach. Do you know any? And we'll send them like all the listed providers in that area. So that would be something you could do as well, as Chantel, is like to actually email the IOCDF and say, here is where I'm at in Canada. Because IOCDF has a lot of relationships with people in Canada and they can kind of link you up and set you up with someone that can help you find treatment. I know it's overwhelming to find a therapist. It is super overwhelming. So I would trust emailing the IOCDF to get that more kind of personalized touch. I would definitely do that.
You guys, I love y'all and I love the comments you're giving each other. Just seeing you like motivate each other, tell people like that OCD is ego dystonic. Like y'all are the best. This is so great. Sorry, I'm kind of reading through the comments. Nikki at 1146 said, life is full of accidental ERP. This is the name I've given it. I've lost count of how many times I found myself doing exposures without planning to. Sometimes we have no choice. I'm going through this at the moment on a huge scale, but I know now that having done a lot of things accidentally in the past, that I can actually do it and nothing bad will happen because nothing bad happened previously. I firmly believe in ERP. So yeah, we talk about this all the time, right? Living life. People always say, well, what is ERP as a lifestyle? And I'm like, living your life. That's it. Like, you don't need to keep doing ERP every day. You don't have to sit down and say like, okay, what are my exposures for the day? Like, did we do them? It's like, no, go live your life and ERP will happen. I love this, hearing about different ways people integrated different work into their treatment. Yeah, y'all are so kind. I love all your questions. And we've run out of time, so we've gotten to no pre-submitted questions, but Chris and I will always have those in the back burner to pull up and try to get to as we can. But I love this group. I love you guys. I'm so grateful and humble for an opportunity to have a space where we can just speak openly and candidly about what we're hearing, what we're thinking, but what we feel like is really important that the community knows. And I hope that what you hear at the end of the day is that everything Chris and I say 100% comes from our heart and comes from a place of us wanting to help guide people to the best treatment that they should be getting. And our goal is that you guys have resources, education, and tools to know what you should ask, what you should expect, and how what you should want. And at the end of the day, that word we always talk about, it's freedom. Freedom is possible, and it is something you can have despite having an OCD diagnosis, and you deserve that. And so you got to keep fighting for whatever treatment you need to get to that place of freedom.
Yeah, I know, really well said. I what I want people to walk away from today's stream is just that the goal of treatment is, I'm sure a lot of you have friends in therapy. Maybe they're going through a breakup or they're grieving a loss, and you hear them, sure, it's tough. They have to bring up really difficult moments, but overall you're seeing them get better and get more freedom. And you may feel like, why don't I get that? How come because I have OCD, my therapy, every time I go, I just feel miserable leaving? I can't promise you won't feel great. It probably means that you did some really good work, but overall mentally you should be at a point where you really have clarity and you're saying like, look, I feel myself getting closer and closer. I look at my own treatment. I feel like every single week and week after week and week, didn't mean I didn't have ups and downs, but every single time I was in the car, I was my treatment was a 4-hour round trip, my mom and I'd be speaking. My mom would say that you're getting lighter, you're getting happier, you're getting more clear. And I started to see that. So if you feel stagnant or you don't feel like you're getting that, totally okay to have that conversation with your clinician. And ultimately you may need to find a different provider if you just feel like you're hitting your head into a wall. But treatment should absolutely be something that is giving you your life back. So make sure that's what's happening in your therapy sessions.
Absolutely. Thanks, you guys. We love y'all. We love this space and are excited to see you in 2 weeks, because next week they'll be here for the research roundtable next Wednesday. Thanks, y'all.
Oh yeah, you're right. I was totally wrong. Okay, yeah. But I was going to say real quick, we have 2 other guests that are coming this month. So we have Jenna I'm going to butcher her last name.
Overbaugh. Yes.
Overbaugh. Jenna's going to kill me when we see her. So we have Jenna Overbaugh in 2 weeks, and then we have John Hirschfield in 3 weeks. So we have some really great programming for you, and Liz and I will be back. So please join us and see John and Kyle next Wednesday. But we'll be back in 2 and 3 weeks here, Wednesdays, 12 noon Eastern. We love you guys. Take care.
Bye, guys.